Hello. Okay, the slide is off. Yay! You guys can all see my bedroom. I'm gonna go ahead and ask our panelists to turn on their cameras. And that is Catherine Garupa White, Martha Dina Aguayo, Mary Leon, and Trish Johnson. So before we get started, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. And we are very glad to be here. We just this panel, I think, to be able to talk about the impacts of environmental justice, of equity, and I think if you've been a part of the scoping plan workshops, you've heard loud and clear that we can't just silo these issues just in one workshop, but it needs to be integrated all throughout. So I think that is one thing that we have heard loud and clear and taking back in. But as always, just really want to give space and opportunity to continue the conversation and to really learn and hear from our EJEC members. So I will share, my name, a little bit about what we're going to cover today, and then I'll turn it over to our panelists to share their introductions about themselves, and then what they hope that the attendees today will take away from the conversations. So for those who don't know, my name is Chanel Fletcher. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer of Environmental Justice at CARB. And in that role, really looking at and thinking about how we are operationalizing and advancing environmental justice, not just within the environmental justice section or within our Office of Community Protection, but agency-wide, and also thinking about the efforts that we're taking to really incorporate and build in racial equity in everything that we do from the very beginning. One of the most important pieces when you're doing this kind of work is to have the expertise of those that are working in the communities, community members. And so I think that's why it's so critical and important to have the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee to be helping us along, to give us that direct feedback. And then I think the other important part is for us to receive that feedback and to actually incorporate it. So it's definitely not, I think that we want to just have people talking at us, but we really want to think about how we are actually incorporating that feedback and how we are creating change. For this panel, what we really wanted to do was take a step back from kind of like PowerPoints and the slides and really just have a conversation. And so in some ways, I wanted to kind of do it in two parts, right? So I wanted to kind of invite the attendees to kind of be a part of that space. So I'm going to ask a couple of framing questions. They're really going to get to that kind of thing of what does it look like to integrate equity and environmental justice into the scoping plan, both in terms of the process, in terms of those building blocks of the scoping plan. Also just asking some bigger questions around environmental justice at CARB and really just tapping into the expertise of those that are on this panel. The chat should be open, and so we really do want to encourage folks to please use the chat to chime in. I think if there are questions, so if you hear a response and you're like, wait a second, I want to ask a follow-up to that, please do kind of use that chat as that function to do that. And we will have Trish Johnson, she'll be scanning the chat for us. The other thing that we want to do is really kind of invite it to be a little bit more of a dialogue. And so, well, like I said, we'll ask a few questions. We'll have some folks that will be joining us a little bit later too, but then we'll really give that time for, I think, public comment, for also folks to ask questions of our panelists. Really want to kind of, again, like make this both, I think, a learning exercise for CARB, but for everyone that's joining us. So with that, I will stop talking. I'll turn it over to our panelists, and then I'll just ask one more time. If panelists can, like I said, turning on their cameras, that would be awesome. So I will turn it over to Martha to give an introduction.
I still hear a lot of music, and it's hard to, I don't know where the music is coming from.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. In terms of the technical, can we turn the music off?
I cleared it up. It was on my end. Okay, figured it out. Thanks.
Okay, we're all good. So you want to give an introduction, Martha?
Yeah, and I'm answering the questions, right, that we had earlier.
Let's have you do the introductions, and then I think I'll do a couple of framing questions, and then we'll break it up and we'll do some questions from the chat.
Okay, so Martha Arguello with Physicians for Social Responsibility. I've been on the EJAC since 2007 and have worked, all those years with CARB in a number of settings. I don't know who to pass it to.
Let's go ahead to Catherine.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I am Dr. Catherine Garuba-White, but you can just call me Catherine. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, or CVAC for short, and honored to be on the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee.
And sorry, we are wrapping up school, so this is school life. Thank you, Catherine. And then I see Mayor Ray Leone is on. Is it possible for you to turn your camera on, Ray? Or to unmute? Okay, and if not, then I will turn over. I see that Tom is on, Tom Helm. Tom, is it possible for you to turn your camera on and unmute?
I see the thing to unmute, and I see a thing that I press, your video goes on and off, but I'm not sure how to turn on my video. Sorry. I'm used to Zoom.
I know. It's all an experience for us with what is this GoToWebinar, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. Having your voice is enough, and if we can figure out how to help you turn on your camera, that's awesome.
Thank you. And I also have my not school-age children quite yet here, and I will be helping put one of them or both of them down for a nap. So I might have to just take a little 10-15 minute break, but thanks for having me.
And if you just want to say your name, organization, that would be awesome too, just so people know.
Oh yeah, Tom Helm. I am from Valley Improvement Projects in Stanislaus County, and also the coordinator for the California Environmental Justice Coalition, which is a statewide coalition, as our name suggests.
Awesome. Okay, and I'm gonna try, Ray, I'm gonna try you one more time. If you can unmute and turn your camera on, that would be awesome. Okay, Ray, we will come back to you. And I just want to say, like, totally want to normalize school-age children, putting kids to bed, people coming in and out, because that is like real life. And I think part of this, to me at least, part of what's important is being able to be human in this space and in this work. So as you guys can see, my son Felix will probably come in and out, but again, we're just going to normalize being human. So I will start, like I said, with a couple of those framing questions. I'll probably just do three kind of, and it's very much open to whoever wants to chime in first. And like I said, as we get kind of more EJAC members coming on, we'll kind of pause and introduce them. But one of the first questions that I wanted to ask, because many of, I think, our EJAC members have a deep history with CARB already, I wanted to ask, can you share your experience with environmental justice at CARB? I know that's a really big question, so would love to kind of hear, I think, the history that you kind of have seen with your experience with CARB around environmental justice, and based off of that, kind of like any kind of recommendations that you would have thinking about that integration question of environmental justice at CARB and what you would want to see. And happy to have, I think, Marta, Catherine, Tom, whoever wants to chime in on that.
Sure, this is Catherine with CVAC. I can start with just a few initial thoughts. So I mentioned I work with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. I started out as a community organizer in 2006. And for those who don't know, hopefully everyone already does, but the San Joaquin Valley is one of the most polluted air basins and one of the most unequal places in the United States. So we've had a pretty long history of working with the San Joaquin Valley Air District and the California Air Resources Board, even before AB 32, to strive to meet clean air standards for the San Joaquin Valley. Our air basin hasn't even met 1997 standards for particle pollution. So I would just say briefly at a high level that in my experience, it's been a long and slow progression with the Air Resources Board towards initial recognition of environmental justice and equity issues as a priority that is hopefully putting us on a pathway towards direct integration of those principles into the work. I feel like we have moved to a place where it's much more common to hear the term used, but we don't necessarily always mean the same things, and it's not necessarily directly embedded in processes yet. And for me, that's the aspirational long-term vision.
I can go. My experience with CARB goes back beyond AB 32 to some extent, working with CARB and other boards and departments around developing a strategy for environmental justice. It dates back to the Land Use Handbook and other ways over the last 21 years that I've been at PSR that we have tried to work with the agency to begin to address the environmental health and justice problems that communities are facing because our inability to clean the air, to transition from fossil fuels, and everything from, the Clean Car campaign to many of those campaigns we have been part of over the years. And then with AB 32, we were part of the team that helped negotiate some of the language around AB 32 and came up with some of the concepts. Have been serving on the EJAC board for a long time, and I think I would echo what Catherine said, that it's we understand that we're part of a movement, and that movements, that arc of history toward bending toward justice takes a long time, and so it's been a long time, I think, in the effort to educate ourselves about how to work with the agency, and second, how the agency can begin to integrate the concepts of environmental justice into its everyday practice. And we're still working toward that. And we hope that this process begins to be transformative so we can help that the agency actually transform itself. Because, to address the systemic racism that gives rise to environmental injustice, we have to change institutional behavior and how agencies behave. And we're in that for the long haul. And I'll stop.
That's super helpful. And Tom, I don't know if you wanted to chime in, but wanted to give you space before potentially move on to the next question.
Just, yeah, kind of reflecting what folks said. There's a diversity of experience because of the different air districts and how we interact with both CARB and the air districts, how CARB interacts with the air districts. But I can tell you that starting out, I was kind of learning about air quality from scratch, and some folks were very helpful, both in the agency and outside the agency, obviously with other groups. Sometimes, and I'm sure others experience this, there can be kind of condescending tones, as in, I went to school for this, I've been doing this for a decade, and who are you to think that you know more than me, or providing information. So it can be a challenge, and folks, and whether you're involved in environmental justice or air quality work or whatever it is, stick with it and find friendly staff members that are willing to take time to talk you through things, and eventually you might be appointed to EJAC, I guess. Thanks.
And I think that is true, right? And I think there's a lesson there in terms of like we ourselves, right, with these complex processes, like how we are hearing, I think, community voice, and whether we are valuing that and seeing that as expertise, right, and how we are treating. I think that goes to that point, right, of institutional behavior, right? So we can either be like, oh, I've been doing this for years. Let me explain to you how this works. But if we are, I think to Martha's point, trying to change that systemic racism, right? It's instead of us trying to explain how it works, it's us trying to figure out if it is working to achieve what we want it to. So I appreciate that piece, Tom. Um, and then
And
Trish, oh,
oh,
you go ahead.
sorry.
Go for it.
I question whether or not to mention this, but I will. There was one time I was told by, I'll just say, a CARB board member that I was well-spoken and articulate, and that was kind of one of those. I was like, I went to college. Anyways, thanks for letting me share.
No, no. And you're seeing, if I don't know if you can see my face, but my face is grimacing because I definitely have had the experience of, wow, you're so well spoken. And um, yes, and I think that is exactly the behavior that we don't want to encourage, that we do need to be changing. Um, and I did mention from the jump that people would be coming in and out, right? So, and that's part of, I think, the fluidity of this session. I did want to note that Communities for Better Environment, they can only stay on until 2 p.m. And so while I think our two ETAC members, Connie and Shripa, were unable to attend, Ashley is able to attend on their behalf. And so Ashley wanted to give you space to share a quick introduction. And if you wanted to kind of share and reflect on that question, happy to have you do so.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, sorry, same. I'm so used to Zoom as well. This has been an education, but I'm so glad to be here, and I'm very thankful for the space that folks are offering to really share what our experiences have been like. And I definitely want to recognize being a part of a EJ community. Again, Ashley from Communities for a Better Environment, but I'm also a Wilmington resident. And I think one of the big elements to my experience has really been the failure to cut refinery emissions, obviously being a big part of that experience. And obviously Wilmington has the highest concentration of oil refineries in the entire West Coast. Unfortunately, California's scoping plan over the years has not made the progress to cut greenhouse gas emissions from oil refineries. So according to the state's own emission inventory. And so our community suffers from climate impacts, including higher temperatures, which also causes increased smog formation, as well as vulnerability to heat waves. And now with the hazardous wildfires, air pollution, on top of our constant local fossil fuel emissions. So it's definitely an experience being a frontline resident that I think folks know is very particular. And while we work hard for local regulation to clean up refineries and also for the state transportation programs to electrify vehicles, we also need CARB to obviously get serious about cutting oil refinery greenhouse gas emissions, because the cap and trade program has clearly been a failure to deliver the cuts and to be the necessary change for our state and our communities. And the combination of oil extraction, oil refineries, and the transportation fuels that they produce are obviously the biggest source of greenhouse gases. And so I definitely am glad that I can represent Wilmington, but obviously want to recognize that it's not just our home, and unfortunately we share it with all of these major high concentration. We actually have all three, and we need a phase out plan, especially in the period that we're in now, through a just transition to reduce these essentially step by step. And there really is no other way to clean up the regional smog and the local toxins and meet our state local goals, and also no way to meet these equity goals. So we really need to make sure that there's a phase out of fossil fuels for not only the health of frontline communities, but also for the future of our communities in general. And to avoid any kind of disasters that we know are going to continue to happen. They're going to continue, and we're going to continue to see that frontline communities are really dealing with the impacts and being hit first. And so we need to stop poisoning communities of color, and we really need to make sure that the Clean Air Act standards that CARB must get serious in this round of the scoping plan. So that's really what we wanted to make sure that that I could share, but also wanting to highlight the experiences and the elements that contribute to the EJ experience here in Wilmington. So yeah, thank you for giving me some space.
Thank you for creating space. I know this is in the middle of the workday, and so I appreciate everybody, I think, who is showing up and who is being here. And as long as we have you, Ashley, I'm happy to have you here. I also wanted to acknowledge Ray, high five. We have your camera on. I hope you can unmute. I wanted to give you a chance. Introductions, and I think any response that you have to that kind of bigger question too.
Hello, buenas tardes, everybody. Pleasure to be here. And actually, I was out to lunch and I was rushing to get back. And then one constituent stops me, then another one. I said, you know what, how about we talk while I give you a ride home, then I got to go to my office. But of course, it's always a pleasure for me to be engaged in these pláticas, these conversations, to see how we can make it better for all hardworking families throughout the state of California, which I'm the mayor of one of those cities that houses numerous farm workers, dozens, hundreds of thousands of farm workers, essential workers, critical workers for our health and safety. And we should be able to do what we can, everything to improve the quality of life for these folks that are making it possible, for us to be able to eat, and my pleasure to be here. Good to see Marta. Saludos, Catherine. And I see some black screen right there, Ashley and Chanel, of course. Good to see you. And thank you. So I guess, my Rey Leon, the Leap Institute, and also Mayor City of Rio.
Awesome. So happy to have you, and also to have a local elected. I think that's really exciting for me. I'm going to keep us moving, and I think Ashley actually kind of helped with this transition in some ways, particularly bringing that expertise from expertise and experience around frontline communities. I'm going to ask this question, have you guys answer it, and then we'll kind of go to the chat and to folks in the audience. But the question is, we've definitely heard loud and clear the integration piece. So this is a twofold question. Part one is, what is needed to ensure equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan? And then part two is like, what are the specific recommendations that you would have for CARB to make that happen? So part one, kind of like, what are those kind of like higher level themes, the things that you want to like recommend and share? Part two is like, what are specific actions we can take right now in this moment to make that happen? And again, anyone can kick it off. Want to make it, I think, as open as possible.
So that's definitely a big question, but since I was on the prep call yesterday and got to see these questions in advance, I'll take a first pass at it. And this might be one that we may have to have several go arounds on this question. But good afternoon again, everybody. Catherine with Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. I think just kind of layering on what we were discussing earlier and what you said, Chanel, about recognizing community expertise, I think there is a fundamental challenge about shifting the expert model to center community expertise and to recognize that data and science has to be validated by people's lived experiences. So like Tom was saying in his introduction, if an agency staff person says, I went to school with this for this, you're not the person living next to the facility that knows that every morning at 2 a.m. that there's a certain smell coming out of it, right? Like there are a lot of aspects of living in the community that I think aren't recognized and valued. That's pretty fundamental. And another thing that we've had some conversation about is also about the capacity for the environmental justice and equity perspective to have the right and the opportunity to ask questions about the assumptions that science makes, and some of the foundational laws and studies and reports that were presented yesterday. There were a lot of assumptions in there that we were basically just told, like, this is the foundational information and now we need to move forward from here, without directly even explicitly naming that there are biases, racism, and inherent limitation that are built into data and into modeling And just one example is the fact that the cost of a human life in most calculations is based on your total potential for income over the span of your life. So if you're a farm worker who unfortunately in most circumstances is being not paid a fair wage, your life is going to have a much lower value than, for instance, a tech worker, which then means when you have a region like the San Joaquin Valley, given the demographics that we have, that essentially we're told our lives are worth less, right? And then certain classes of people like farm workers are told your lives are worth less. That's inherently problematic, and we can't just accept those assumptions without, you know, there are ways that those can be addressed in the data. There are ways that those can be explicitly discussed, and also, again, having things like community expertise is a counterbalance. In terms of some more specific actions, I think one call that I've heard loud and clear throughout my career, whether it's on air pollution issues or its intersection with climate justice, because of course, multiple air pollutants are also greenhouse gases. We need direct reductions. We need actual enforcement of the existing rules and plans, right? We're constantly told that we have the best science, that we're the most cutting edge, but if we're not seeing the reality on the ground, if we're over relying on market systems and credit-based systems that are highly subject to corruption, which the emission reduction credit system in the San Joaquin Valley is just one of way too many examples of the problem that happens when we assume that we can quantify air pollution, start issuing credits, let people buy them instead of actually directly reducing their emissions at the site. I mean, those are fundamental reasons why the situation in environmental justice communities is actually getting worse instead of better. So can we model scenarios that don't have market-based mechanisms? Can we model scenarios that don't have experimental technologies like carbon capture and sequestration that is greenwashing to allow for enhanced oil recovery? And again, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg of what's been at the top of my mind just listening to the meetings the last day and a half, and I could go on, but want to give space for all of my other panelists, so I will stop there for now.
Yeah, and I would, oh, go ahead. Well, I would build everything she's go. I'm sorry. You go first. I really mean it this time.
I just only quickly wanted to say, I know that we had another panelist that joined, so Katie Valenzuela. So Katie, I just wanted to say hi, Katie. Have you have Martha go and finish what she was going to say, which is going to be amazing, and then have you do a quick introduction, and I can get the question for you. Sorry, Martha, you go ahead.
Okay. Oh, no pressure. I have to be amazing now. Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that we need is a real partnership. I don't like being a broken record, and none of us like being a broken record. And I am petty, and I do like saying I told you so, but I would actually prefer if we were listened to, because many of the things that we said would happen have happened, right? Emissions didn't go down in certain communities. You know, the offset program actually did what we said would do, right? We don't have verifiable emissions reductions. And we can argue about, well, who did that research and what of those things, versus we could actually listen and do what Catherine just said, figure out ways to actually do direct emissions reductions along with the other market-based mechanisms. We can do so much more to figure out the just transition so that we're actually doing it right and having, you know, just doing things differently. But the other part, I mean, I think the main part is actually listening to the environmental justice community. And I want to share an anecdote. We took, I think it was maybe almost close to 30, almost 24, 25 staff from CARB and some board members on a tour. And I believe Ashley, who spoke earlier, was on that tour. We went to her neighborhood in Wilmington. And when we got to parts of Wilmington where you see that oil drilling sites are next, like on people's yard, we heard staff gasp. These are air regulators. Why are they gasping? This is the things they're permitting to happen, right? So there is this massive disconnect to what happens on the ground to what happens in your offices. And that divide has to stop. And it shouldn't be incumbent on the environmental justice community to take you on a tour of the communities that you're trying to fix, right? And as we were leaving, people were like, well, maybe they should just move or not live here. And we're like, you know, that's not an option. So if there isn't a deep understanding of what it means to just tell somebody who can only buy a house in this really toxic neighborhood because that's what's affordable, and to tell them to move, or that's affordable rent space. So there's just a real fundamental lack of understanding. Two, the environmental justice community actually needs to have more of the technical support and the research support from CARB staff, and so that we can actually defend some of what our lived experience bears out all the time. And with that, I'll stop because I like the exchange.
Okay, and I'm just gonna, I said I was gonna have you do an introduction, Katie, so you do an introduction.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. It's been a while since I've used GoTo Meetings. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see your faces. It's like 2015. It's really good to be here. I'm Katie Valenzuela. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Sacramento. Back in the last scoping plan update, I was honored to serve as the co-chair for the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and then left that to staff the Joint Legislative Committee on Climate Change Policies, and Eduardo Garcia also in his role on the Air Resources Board during that process. So now I'm a free agent doing EJ consulting and local Sacramento politics. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, I'm just going to restate the question that we had asked. And I think for everybody else that's listening, I just want folks to know this is the question folks on the panel are going to ask and discuss, and then we are going to kind of open it up to what's in the chat and to folks being able to raise their hand and have some dialogue. The question was, so we've heard a lot about ensuring equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan. So part one of this two-part question is, what is needed to ensure equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan? And then part two are, what are the specific recommendations that CARB can do right now to integrate equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan?
So do I get to answer that? Does everybody else already do that?
Catherine and Martha did. I think Ray and you are up next.
Go ahead, Mayor. Oh, we can't hear you.
This is the first time I hear the question. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to repeat it one more time? Or you got it?
Please. And then
Okay.
once you ask it, then we'll have Katie answer it.
You know, it's a battle between the city councilwoman and the mayor. I'm not going to get in the middle of that, so I will just restate the question one more time. Two-part question. So what is needed to ensure equity and environmental justice and the scoping plan? And then the part two is, what are the specific recommendations that you have for CARB right now to integrate equity and environmental justice?
I can start, Mayor, if you'd like. Okay, I'll start. So something that we've never really had in California is really a vision of where we're going. We really started from where we're at, and we focused on compliance and reducing emissions, but we've never really stepped back and thought to ourselves, what does it look like to get there? What does 2030 look like? What does 2045 work like? And go back from there. It's kind of like strategic planning, where you're just trying to fit your work into a strategic plan versus stepping back and setting goals and then backing up and looking at whether the work fits those goals. And in California in particular, we have industries, and I can say this just like openly, we have industries that probably shouldn't exist here anymore in 2030 and 2045. You know, we have to really talk about, but if we look from where we are and how we move forward with emissions reductions, we never really have that conversation around what the future holds for a just transition, what the future holds for how we move goods, what the future looks like for where we live, how we're moving around our spaces. And that's a vision that has to come from the communities. That's a vision that's going to be very unique to the communities and could really create a statewide vision that could be transformative, and is what we've been missing in California climate policy is that transformative, like what does it look like in 2045, and then how are we going to get there versus the opposite way. And so for me, I think the big piece, the opportunity that the scoping plan presents that I haven't really heard yet is is what we started in the last scoping plan, right? I mean, we did 19 workshops all over the state of California. We went to Huron in August. If you want to know what Huron is like, go in August. You know, we went to Oildale, we went to Los Angeles, as Martha said, and we saw firsthand, but we never really asked the question of, what does it look like? What does it look like if you could wave a wand and make it happen in Wilmington or wherever? What is that vision that the community has, so that we can tailor the plan and the policy to meet that vision, rather than going the other way around, excuse me, and trying to figure out how to cram existing policies and industries into a plan. And I'll stop there because I'm choking on a chip that I just ate. So go ahead, Mayor Huron.
Drink water, drink water. Drink organic water. Nah. So, you know, I guess I'm going to be echoing what my colleagues have said and sharing kind of, I guess, some more anecdotal. And at the last scoping plan, you know, I was talking about gray water systems, you know, and talking about them similar as a program similar to what existed with the drought resistant lawns, you know, which would have meant investing money to train people and to pay small companies to do the renovations on homes that they can do renovations on, to make them gray water systems. And granted, it's about water, but it's not just about water, because we know that a good portion of the energy that we use in California is used to pump water. So then if people are not having to water their lawn with expensive potable water, and is getting water with the gray water from the system they've been able to install while people have been employed, trained, and empowered, you know, then they're saving money because they're not using the potable water. And because they're not demanding the additional potable water for the trees, then there's less energy being used to pump that water to their homes or to the system. And if this happens throughout the state of California, I think there's a good GHG footprint that we'll be able to take care of. In communities like my own, a region like ours in San Joaquin Valley and other parts of California, you know, the drought's tough this year. I just got word that our valley, or at least my city, will only have be getting a 25% allocation of water, 25% of what we usually get. And so we're scrambling. You know, a few years ago, I was able to pass a gray water ordinance so that new single family homes and new apartment complexes could have gray water systems. The single family homes be gray water ready. The apartment complexes be have full-fledged gray water systems attached. Because what happened at the last drought, we lost a lot of trees. You know, so I'm saying, well, let's help homes keep their trees and save money, and thus reduce GHGs, right? I think it's a very small thing because it only applies to new developments. But imagine if we had funding at the state level similar to the program that was for drought resistant lawns to train, employ, and get this done in different regions. You know, what would that look like? You know, in terms of money in people's pockets, you know, it's environmental justice, but it's economic justice. It's maintaining the green canopies, you know. And I was kind of like the crazy guy on the advisory committee talking about this. I still think it's very relevant and something that I think could be extremely impactful, you know, but only if we pursue it and if we put the resources to it, you know. So yeah, I think Marta said it earlier. Listen to us, you know. Now we're back at the drought, you know, and it's I think going to be worse this time. So let's take those mechanisms that will have impacts on real lives, on people on the ground, the people that are already being, you know, not paid a living wage. I think Catherine shared that. You know, farm workers, they work so hard. It's the median income here in my city is 23,000 in the median household income. And not everybody's, you know, it's like there's folks that earn way more than that. So I mean, what would the average be for farm workers alone, right? So they're already having to deal with the struggle, the economic struggle. You know, how could we alleviate that you know, the families that work the hardest, man? I mean, who else is gonna go out there in 99-degree weather to pick your lettuce for salad that you're gonna pay $10 for. You know, and it has probably like just a tenth of the lettuce that they pick for peanuts, right? So let's do right by the people that have been putting it down, not just these past few years, not just during the time that they were identified as essential workers, but for generations. My father was a bracero farm worker. He arrived in 51 to Huron. You know, we've been putting it down and sacrificing a great deal for a very long time. You know, and so that's why that's why this exists, the EJAC, right? Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. So let's give it value. Let's rise it up to where it should be, so that we can make the real changes and have the real impact on the lives that have been disproportionately impacted negatively. I always like saying let's disproportionately impact them positively, right? If we want to make things right, let's do that. So the other thing is, you know, I've been fighting hard out here in Huron. You guys know that I'm a big EV fan, electric vehicle superhero, some say. Nah. But you know, in my community, we have 30 electric vehicle chargers, right? Unfortunately, the rebates and incentives aren't up to par for those families that could benefit the most. The farm worker families that I referred to earlier. You know, once you have the water in the river, you know, what's the problem? Why can't people get the canoes, right? Even with the incentives and the rebates. You know, so I think we got to start with communities like my own to figure out, okay, what solution can we create that will have a real impact? And I proposed that to some of my ARB colleagues, and I haven't shared this with neither Chanel nor Trish. I've mentioned this just in public, but had a conversation with some of the ARB folks in the rebate program, but they didn't understand. They didn't get it. You know, if this city has the most EV chargers for a city in the country per capita, there's something going on right there. So why can't we work towards helping it complete the pilot that it's initiated, right? And so yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of work on the ground, but if we're not being paid attention to, and our advice not being given the value to have the impact that to prevent unfortunate scenarios, then that's very problematic. So all right, what was the second question? Or is that it?
That I think that was it. I felt like you covered both of them. I did want to open it up to other panelists if folks wanted to respond or chime in before we move to opening it up to the audience right now.
Thank you. Going on mute.
I just want to say to Ray's idea, right? And so part of what he was speaking to, that it comes with that community vision, is the intersectional solutions, the solutions that actually move us further, because it's not just doing one thing at a time, but it's addressing multiple needs at one time. So another need that he didn't name, so gray water systems, for example, have been named by plumbers, pipe fitters as a job growth opportunity as we decarbonize buildings and they lose those jobs. So you're also like, a solution as simple as, hey, why don't we help save water and reduce bills and give people access to that energy, like savings, is also going to have all of these co-benefits. And that's something that you get when you talk to environmental justice communities and you leave space for those really neighborhood level, community level ideas, as they end up having all of these great intersecting benefits that are much bigger than just the project that's being named.
Oh, you know, one thing that I forgot to say is that I think if our state agencies, like how our schools in our community should reflect demographics of the community, I think state agencies should reflect the demographics of our state. And I think that's part of the gap of understanding, you know, because say, for example, we had Katie Valenzuela in there, you know, Catherine, Marta, you know, along with Chanel and Trish. I mean, I think in levels where we can make the real change. You know, I think there comes a point where they don't understand it because they didn't live it, or because they didn't grow up around it, or because something else, I don't know. But I think when we can't mirror the institution with the reality of who we are, then we're not going to channel the solutions to impact that reality.
I'm going to chime in. See, I feel bad because I said we were going to go to the audience, but I have to acknowledge Mary Rose is only on for 30 minutes. And so I'm very, very grateful for this 30 minutes. So Mary Rose, if you wanted to turn your camera on and unmute, happy to have you participate for the time that we have you. And I can just let you know the question that I think folks are responding to, which is two-part question, which was basically what is needed to ensure equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan, and then what are the specific recommendations you have for CARB to integrate equity and environmental justice. So that's the question. But with that said, I'm happy to also just have you, I think, since again it's that 30-minute window, have you share whatever I think feels the most important and resonates the most with you. I think you're on mute, but also I remembered to ask if you don't mind doing an introduction and sharing a little bit for folks. That would be awesome too. Oh, I know. Go to webinar. It's like it's a learning experience for all of us. Did you find the? Okay. Did you find the mute button? I don't know. I wish I could help you.
Do it.
I know we're all like, I'm like, if you look at the top of your screen, there should be that circle that could go. What is it? Like a red or green circle.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, you did it.
Hello, lovely friends. So I'm Mary Rose Taruk. I'm trying to change my screen. I met the environmental justice movement when I was 18. It was a year after the first National People Environmental Leadership Summit, and I fell in love. Like, I felt at home here. Like, I felt seen as a Filipina immigrant. I felt seen coming from a small town in the Central Valley of California, and I felt like there was a path forward for how Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian folks had that there was room for our leadership in the environmental movement in America. And it's been an uphill battle since. And I was privileged to work at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network for 16 years. I helped start some big statewide coalitions, the Asian Pacific American Climate Coalition, what was called the SB 535 Coalition or the California Climate Equity Coalition, as well as the No Tropical Forest Standard Offsets Coalition that was international, and currently I'm the coordinator of the Reclaim Our Power Utility Justice Campaign to make sure that our Northern California energy system is run and controlled by frontline communities and workers. So I chaired the EJAC for the last 2 sessions, including with Katie and Tom and other friends. And so some of the questions you wanted me to answer are what, Chanel?
So the question is a 2-part question. I think the what is needed to ensure equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan, and then what are the specific recommendations you have for CARB right now to integrate equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan?
So I've worked with other state agencies before now. CARB was definitely one of my first entries into how to help environmental justice land in one of our state agencies. And it was really difficult. I think that the scoping plan, the second time around, it was like reconvening the EJAC from when the EJAC basically was disbanded, and there were fights between CARB's staff and the chair and the EJAC, and there were lawsuits like filed. It was raucous. And so it was like, how is environmental justice going to land in the second round of the scoping plan? And I think, you know, the dedication of EJ staff from CARB was helpful. And then the third round of the EJAC, we lobbied for an environmental justice secretary or higher up within CARB, and we we were able to successfully get that. That was part of a team, and so it's great that your role there, Chanel, is part of the work of the EJAC, because there are all these ideas and wisdom that come from our communities, environmental justice communities from all over California, and it has to be able to land well inside CARB. And we saw that it wasn't landing well, and part of that is who is inside CARB. I could say at the time the CARB chair was not friendly. There were fights between the EJAC and the environmental justice community and the CARB chair at the time, and it was really difficult to be heard. And so I think what's refreshing about this time around is there are new folks in leadership roles within CARB, from the chair to others, and like how are they curious and interested in working with and partnering with environmental justice communities so that our ideas could land well in the scoping plan and beyond. And so it has that relationship, and that fertile ground has to be there. And so what is it that CARB staff and board are doing to create that fertile ground for the recommendations to land well? So that's a question and an advocacy opportunity, a growing opportunity for everybody, and I think there's room for that, and there's work to be done for that to happen.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I feel like this is like there's like so much wisdom here. I feel a little overwhelmed. I also feel like this audience is going to seriously mistrust me. But remember when I said at the very beginning, people are going to be coming in and out, right? Like there's a lot of fluidity. It's a party. We just got to remember that vibe. I swear we're going to get to you. But then Luis Almeida just came in. And so I want to give him an opportunity to share out, to give an introduction of who he is, to respond to the question. So Luis, if you can turn on your camera and unmute. And we've all learned that GoToMedia, or GoToWebinars, GoToWebinars a learning experience. Happy to have you introduce yourself, and I can share the question. And then we will go to the audience, I promise.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have the access to a webcam at this point, but I've been listening. I've been on the call, so I've been listening to most of the conversation.
Oh, awesome. Then I don't have to repeat the question, and you can just do the intro and you can respond.
Sure, let's do it. Can you, okay, can you catch me up? What's the question?
Okay, so the question, so you introduce yourself and then answer this question. And the question, it's a two-part question. Question is, what is needed to ensure environmental justice and equity in the scoping plan? And then what specific recommendations do you have for CARB right now to integrate equity and environmental justice in the scoping plan?
My name is Luis Olmedo, again, Executive Director for Comité Cívico del Valle, second term member of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge, both Martha and Mary Rose's expertise. There's definitely, driving the conversation in the 2017 scoping plan. And to be quite honest with you, I think it's important to have honest conversations. I think that you almost didn't have an EJAC, and that's because there's deep disappointment for many reasons. Our communities aren't cookie cutter. I think that the goal of environmental justice, it's a no-brainer. The system as a whole has been serving, I guess, the more influent, those with the greatest access. And even if you put all your resources and strategies into serving what we've come to know as the 1%, Katie's there too. I know she's also a big driver of knowledge and experience. And so you're still going to end up with the 99% that will be left out. And that's not a plan. that's not a real investment on environmental justice or equity. You're not going to achieve anything. And you know, I think you know, there's credit where credit's due. California Air Resources Board has come a long way. It is by far probably the most progressive BDO in Cali, PA, particularly the makeup of its board. But it doesn't stop at the leadership. You know, you can't just have a government appointed. You can't have an EJAC, or, you know, this great triumph of having an environmental justice division or within CARB. Everyone else has to get with the program. That means the peoples who have been there for a long time and will continue to be there after we're all gone. Those people who kind of have made their space and are, you know, troubled by the fact that environmental justice is now coming into their space, that their kingdom that they have owned for so long. And the fact that, you know, those more affluent have made those few, and they know who they are, feel like they're the ones who drive the agenda and make the decisions, not the executive, not the board, by them. They know who they are. And until we change the culture internally, until they open their doors to environmental justice and welcome a Chanel coming in and your team coming in and doing audits and say, hey, open up your books. Let's see, are you doing what you should have done? You know, you haven't, it's okay. We're not here to, you know, in any way punish you for it. We're here to help you, right? And that's the first step. I was very disappointed with the fact of how these workshops occurred. You know, it's like we have this sanitized space. This is for you, EJ. I feel that we're not being given a level playing field because we were given our own space instead of integrating environmental justice into every space. And I'm a firm believer that when we create a platform that is truly environmental justice, it's gonna integrate it into every corner, into the darkest areas of CARB, into areas that we haven't even seen within CARB. You know, agencies, the names and acronyms, divisions, departments, programs, all of it. It's got to be integrated into everything. And why? Because just as environmental justice communities work in these spaces of whether it's industry, whether it's driving innovation, whether it's getting the impacts and the benefits, environmental justice is there. It's not industry wants this, industry says that. You know, we all say that. And until we begin to have those conversations, we're going to continue to get the status quo will think that by creating in their own space of environmental justice, they check the box. No, it's by inserting environmental justice into the entire program, the entire process, every single conversation, you know. And at some point, we're going to realize that, you know, the few cents or fraction of cents compared to the enormous dollars that are there are going to, you know, be difficult for environmental justice to participate. Why? Because we don't have the attorneys, we don't have the engineers, the scientists, the experts. You know, we don't have everything that industry has, and that's where the agency needs to help us. You know, but it requires everybody to come in with an environmental justice lens, and I'm a firm believer that industry wants that. So what I have found, and I'll stop here, but what I have found is that a lot of times industry wants to be an innovative leader, wants to be an environmental justice, a responsible steward of protecting the air, protecting the water, protecting everything, protecting the neighborhoods. But a lot of times the bureaucracy is the one that ends up making good intentions into bad outcomes. And I hope that through this process, we're able to establish a real equitable table. And again, that way we can roll up our sleeves, right? And then get to work. That's where I'm hoping that we get to. And I'm hoping today is kind of putting on notice, this is where we want to be, this is where we want to go. And then tomorrow, everybody at CARB shows up and says, all right, we get it now, right? that's what I'm hoping that we get out of today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was like this is like a really powerful way to end, I feel like, or not end, but to switch to the audience. That's what I should say. So two things I want to just know for everyone on our panel. I think we at CARB are definitely listening. So I want to acknowledge that, I know that our chair is on. I know that our board members, Hector De La Torre, is on. I know that board member Gideon Krakoff is on. I know that particularly like ISD is on as well. So I think I want you guys to know that it's not just me and Trish, even that's what you probably see that's here, but definitely a lot of leadership. And then obviously our executive officer, Richard Corey, is on as well. And then before we go to the audience, I realized that we're halfway through and I didn't introduce one of the most important people on this panel, which is Trish Johnson. I mean, talk about like the OG. So Trish, I'm gonna turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then if you can flag any folks that have their hand raised or anything in the chat that we should have this panel respond to.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Great. I'm Trish Johnson. I've been at the Air Resources Board for about 2 decades now, and I currently work in the Environmental Justice section for Chanel Fletcher, and I've been leading the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee since 2013. It's great to be here with all of you today. I think there are a couple of questions, but first I just wanted to go to folks that have their hand raised, and we do have Julia May with her hand raised. So I can click so that you can unmute yourself and then speak, and then I'll read the questions that have been written. And if others want to speak directly to the panel, go ahead and raise your hand. So let me unmute just a moment. Julia May.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. My colleague, Ashley Hernandez from our Wilmington community spoke earlier, and I appreciate all of the comments you all made. I have a couple comments. CBE works in many different communities, so we have very many issues. Wilmington and Richmond have refineries. Southeast LA and East Oakland are impacted heavily by transportation, as most communities are. And of course, there are many other sources. So I'm trying to focus on one big gap in the number of workshops this week. We noticed there was no industrial source workshop. And so, of course, for our communities, the refineries are, and many other industrial sources are huge greenhouse gas sources and co-pollutant sources. And so that's one reason we wanted to focus on refineries here today, which are also a major EJ problem. As far as your questions, I think everybody is working hard to make the process better, but one obvious simple thing is we need more substance. Simply, we have to cut the emissions. We are not making the progress on cutting the emissions. One thing is there's a disconnect between the state greenhouse gas policy and goals and the local permitting process. I'll give you a real specific example. At the largest oil refinery in California, the Tesoro Marathon Wilmington refinery, that refinery, it had an expansion. So not only are we not phasing out refineries, we've been expanding them. That was enabled by greenhouse gas credits, millions of greenhouse gas credits that the state allowed Tesoro to buy. So it's basically a pay to pollute cheap credits, cheap greenhouse gas credits. And then the state washes its hands of the refinery problem. And then it's up for the local permitters, up to them to review the expansion process and give them a permit related to the co-pollutants, that is the smog and toxics emissions. And that pretty much guarantees that we continue to have a concentration of fossil fuel sources in EJ communities. These already exist, and they get institutionally set up to continue and even to expand. And so we need to address this problem. We need a serious scoping plan that's going to address all the sources, including oil refineries. We've made progress on electricity because electricity can still exist and produce some renewables, but we have not made progress on refineries and the related fuel cycle. So we're really going to need your help on that, and we need a place for that to happen, such as a workshop. And thank you very much for all your thoughtful evaluation.
I don't know if that, because I know Julia wasn't asking us a question, but can we briefly respond to what she said? Thank you so much for calling in too, Julia. I know you're so busy. And I just want to say that when you look at the emissions trends for the industrial sector that are broken out, like the persistent top lines that have really not moved in 15 years of AB 32 are related to fossil fuel extraction, production, and use. And there is no way that we are going to meet the 2030 target, much less the 2045 targets, without talking about the future of fossil fuels in California and hopefully the managed decline of fossil fuels in California. And so I just want to echo and lift up what was just said on behalf of CBE.
I'm echoing Julia and Katie.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if you were asking me to respond to that. So I'll just add, yes, we need a plan for a just transition to phase them out in a reasonable step-by-step fashion. There's no way we're going to meet our smog standards, our toxic standards, and no way to meet the greenhouse gas standards without a phase out. So that's a reality CARB is going to have to face. And I want to repeat, we can't meet the goals without actually cutting the emissions. And that's how we clean up our communities that are overburdened, our EJ communities are overburdened by these pollutants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. Anybody else want to echo, ditto, like, thumbs up? Okay.
I'd like to ditto and just add a couple of thoughts as well. And a specific example in Kern County, the refinery in Lamont, there have been multiple moves to try and exempt that refinery from having to do things like basic fence line monitoring. We know Kern County is ground zero for oil extraction, right? 70 to 80% of what comes out of the state of California comes out of Kern County. And just last night, I happened to be reading an article from National Public Radio comparing what European nations are doing to meet their climate goals versus what the United States is doing. So want to reiterate my concern about the amount of time and weight and rhetoric that's been given to technologies like carbon capture and sequestration that are unproven and that a lot of the slides say may be more cost effective, which first of all, I think is really slippery, right? Like we don't know if it's going to be more cost effective because it's unproven. And I continue to have a lot of concern that we are investing tons of money in schemes that industry lobbyists tell us are going to be a really good idea, that we know that places like the San Joaquin Valley and existing infrastructure are going to be the testing grounds for that. So it's no coincidence that as the state is moving to phase out open agricultural burning in the San Joaquin Valley, we now have multiple proposals for our biomass plants that are very dirty and concentrated in environmental justice communities. Now they're being proposed to be reopened. There are multiple pots of funding in the state budget that could be used to reopen them. And the one in Mendota that's near farm worker housing is proposed to be a mega investment from Chevron and Microsoft and attach carbon capture and sequestration to it. So this idea, this myth that technology is going to save us or we're going to generate credits somewhere and then it's going to offset business as usual so that we can keep going with business as usual, we just move things around on paper. I'm hugely concerned that that's where the level of conversation in California is at, and that's absolutely not where we need to be for our frontline and environmental justice communities.
Yeah, we have failed to have the hard conversations. I just can't. We're going to get stuck on this question. Julia did such a great job teeing this up. Because I'm like, we have failed to have the hard conversations. And so rather than have the hard conversations, we just keep saying, oh, well, maybe if we just ratchet up. What we saw in the 2017 scoping plan, they doubled the use of cap and trade. Say, oh, it's okay, cap and trade will take care of it, with no evidence that that was what was happening, right? And the hard conversation is the transformation of the economy. It's the transformation of how we move goods, of how we make our money, of how we move around. And that's where the real potential co-benefits of the jobs and the co-pollutant reductions and the greening of the communities and the building of communities really comes. Imagine what we can do with these refinery sites, not just in the jobs of the cleanup and the reuse of the actual site, but what that site could become in the middle of communities that are very landlocked that could really be amazing assets. And that's the sort of transformational visioning that we have never done, and that this is hopefully an opportunity under a new board with a continued vision of lack of progress on all charts that you look at in our communities will hopefully help move us to do finally is to have the hard conversation. Because as Catherine said, all this technology is doing is letting us continue the status quo. It's not addressing the root cause of the issue, and there is no proof that it's going to be any better for us long term. And sometimes they actually facilitate things like oil extraction. And is that the vision that we have in California, that we're just continuing to extract and pollute communities like Kern, where my family lives? I mean, that's not the vision that I have when I read AB 32, and I think we're better than this. We're just better.
I would be a terrible facilitator. Bye, Mary Rose. Thank you so much. If I didn't make sure we get to some of the things that are in the chat. And then I have a few more questions. Few is relative. To Trish, what is in the chat?
So there was a comment, but the individual has raised their hand. So I'll just go ahead and unmute Yvonne to speak directly to the panel, if that's okay.
That is okay. Go, Yvonne.
It says, let me see if I can. I seem to be having a problem. It's not letting me unmute at the moment. So I know I have colleagues. Oh, there we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, this is Yvonne Martinez Watson. I'm the chair of the Environmental and Social Justice Committee for the Sierra Club Angeles chapter. I'm not here to speak as an expert. There's so many women here that, and Ray and others, not to leave you out. All of you have done such a wonderful job just putting it out there, exactly what the challenges that we're facing. But I just wanted to speak personally right now as a member of environmental justice community, and the fact that I suffer from severe asthma. And I came close to dying twice in 2019 as a result of the asthma. And now I'm on like specific medical treatment to try to keep it under control. I just want to say that dealing with air quality issues when you live in a community that is mostly Hispanic Latino, and you're surrounded by freeways and heavy industries and an oil field less than a mile away, and traffic and everything. When you hear, you know, I've been attending meetings at our local South Coast Air Quality Management District, and I've been going to CARB meetings for a while now. And when you hear the words cap and trade, it makes you feel like, okay, polluters are being given a chance to offset their emissions by doing something somewhere else. And that is nice for the somewhere else, but it doesn't prevent my asthma attacks. And it doesn't prevent my neighbor's asthma attacks. It doesn't save the life of my people in my family or my community. And one of our Sierra Club national leaders, Hop Hopkins, said in one of his articles that we've created these places that are called sacrifice zones, where it's okay for that neighborhood to essentially be polluted, and those lives are not worth it. And this is something that we really need to change our perspective. is that environmental justice is supposed to be at the heart of everything that we do, whether it's transportation or industries or whatever it is that we're doing, because these sources of pollution do not affect everyone equally. And if we learn any lessons from last year and the pandemic, it's that communities of color who are already softened up because of environmental racism and environmental injustice due to polluting sources, we were the communities hit hardest by COVID. So we need to make a change in the way we fundamentally think about these things. And I think one of the things we need to do is we need to really incorporate environmental justice in everything. I mean, it's nice to have this little space where we can talk about it amongst ourselves, but we need to start talking about it in every other aspect of the scoping plan. So that is my recommendation to you, and that's my comment. And my question is, how do we communicate this to the rest of the CARB board? And how do we communicate to them that we have communities that are tired and they no longer trust CARB? I mean, I've been to meetings for the AB 670, and people get tired because they go to these meetings and they come up with these plans and they invest so much work, and then later on they feel disillusioned that it was all for nothing because they don't see any concrete change. So I just wanted to put it out there because I'm telling you, just for myself, you know, I am an air monitor. I've been a part of a citizen science project. So this is something that hits me directly, where there are days even before COVID when I couldn't go outside. And it's hard to communicate to people that, you know, they'll say, oh, but it's such a beautiful day outside and there's no visible pollution. And they don't seem to understand that, well, my problem is ozone. And ozone is not visible. And it's really hard to get my family and friends to understand why I can't go to their parties or why I can't go out and why I'm stuck at home with air purifiers in every room. And I just wanted to put that out there so you'll know what it's like for someone as an individual having to deal with this and being worried that other people who are less fortunate than I am, and I'm not a rich person, have to deal with this every summer when they don't have air conditioning, they don't have access to air purifiers, and they have to open their windows to escape the heat, which is only going to get worse. So thank you for letting me address this group. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Yvonne, and I definitely heard that question. I want to say thank you for sharing that, because you definitely didn't have to, and I think I don't want anybody to feel like they have to share like how they've been harmed, but I do think like there's ways in which I just want you to know, like listening and just hearing it, I mean, yeah, I think like there's a way in which we need to understand, and this is I think what this panel has been talking about, right? Like the impact of the policies and what that looks like and just the human impact of it. So I just wanted to really appreciate that. I wanted to give folks on the panel a chance to respond to that question. And I would probably frame it as, what do you think in terms of like how to, I think the question was like, right, like how do we have the CARB board hear this? I would love to hear recommendations from this panel, particularly as we talk about kind of processes like AB 617, there's board meetings, but obviously that's not, I think Yvonne already knows about those. So if there's recommendations, happy to have this panel kind of share some of those thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just, sorry to just jump in here, but I don't see the raise hand option. So should I just jump in now since I just...
Oh, that's Luis. I'm sorry. Luis, you don't have to do the raise hand. Sorry, the raise hand is for the the attendees. I couldn't see your face, so I was like, wait, who's talking? And I was like, oh, it's Luis. No, it's anybody. So it's for the panelists. So Luis, Tom, Martha, Katie, Catherine, Ray, like any of you can jump in.
Okay, I'm going to continue to drive this message, and I know it's probably not going to sit well with some, but we just had workshops, and it seems like there was extensive consultation with some stakeholders, particularly industry. And here we are in a box, all for EJ to talk to each other, to vent. You know, I come from a disadvantaged community. I live in a disadvantaged community. I thought we left the old days of being poster child a long time ago. I don't like this type of setup. To me, it's just a check the box. We need to be integrated in every conversation where the plans are being developed, where the expertise and the knowledge, that wealth of knowledge that exists within CARB, we need to be in those conversations. We need to have access to ISD. Where is ISD? It's just, it baffles me. Here we are, a committee, an advisory group that was formed as part of a legislation, and we're still being marginalized. It doesn't make sense. This is not the type of structure that we need. We need to make sure that we have, I mean, my understanding that the board chair, Leanne Randolph, has attended, and some board members, and I want to thank them for that. We need to make sure that deputies and executive staff, I'm sorry, deputies and management, and all other experts, they are here to talk to us, because we've already talked to ourselves decade after decades. I know all the EJ partners here from different communities. We talk to each other all the time. You know, we talk to us, you know, on many issues, but I don't think we need to talk to each other anymore. We need to talk to ISD, and we need to talk to every division that is involved in writing the plan. That's what I want to talk to. So I hope that the message is loud and clear. I'm pretty sure some of them, you know, not going to like it. You know, I'm pretty sure some of them are going to think, well, we want to create their own separate little space for them. We want to be respectful to EJ. Please, don't, what's the word? Don't,
it's
anyways.
respect me less and do more of what we actually ask you to do, I would say, because but you know
Thank
what,
you.
I want to, if I could build on that. So for, you know, sort of practically, what does that look like, right? I think that when we did the deep dives and brought in the leads who were doing that work, it looks a little bit like that, but actually going further, you know, and there was real promise in those meetings that somehow we could actually co-create things, because that's what we're asking you for, right? So if you ask me right now, what do you need to do for EJ? Well, it's really hard when we're talking about it in the abstract. It would be great if that were the case, but right now, unless we're meeting with the industrial section, unless we're meeting with all the folks doing all that other work and co-creating things and doing deep dives so that we bring our knowledge, you relegate us to showing up and constantly exposing our pain and our experience as frontline communities to a brick wall. And that's just a lot of emotional labor that we should not be forced to do, right? We have to parade around our suffering for you to listen to us. That no longer works. And that model of, you know, dragging us about and asking us to come share our painful experiences is how many agencies have internalized what environmental justice is, right? I would look at them, they're here to say how hurt they are again. Well, if that's the only space you give us, that's space we're going to take. So what we're asking is the formation of a different table, right? And that's a co-creation of what the measures should be. And, you know, and I think, you know, new scenarios, it's clear that the modeling that you've used is going to give you, you know, it's going to give you what it's giving you. And those are the things that it's given you in the past, but yet you're doing it again. So we want things to be done differently. We need, you know, we need to be clear on what those assumptions mean and interrogate them. And I think that goes back to what both Katie, what Catherine was saying, what Mary Rose was saying. And so I would say, you know, let's do these workshops because you've got them on the books, but actually begin to do the deep dives with the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And then you make the participation meaningful, right? We have scientists and researchers in all the fields, right, that we can start bringing, but only if it's meaningful. Why am I going to ask somebody to give up their day to come tell you stuff that you're not going to hear? And so this is what the pre-scoping looks like, right? And it will be, you know, diving deep into what is it that we want to see by 2030? What is it that we want to see by 2045? And like Julia said, what are the things that we should no longer be doing in the state? And make sure that we're, you know, that we're coordinating. Your panel yesterday was great, but I got talked at. I couldn't hear anymore. And I work on this stuff, right, 24/7. But that's not how I want to engage with the state around just transition. That setting is not how I want to engage with my brothers and sisters in the labor movement who are really worried about what we're doing, right? This is not how I want to engage with low-income housing folks around the building decarbonization. Because if we continue to engage with this model, we're not going to have the outcomes that we need.
Yeah, and we'll just keep building off of each other, right? I was really disheartened to see that modeling had already been done. I was really disheartened when I saw that modeling had already been done. And I get that it's preliminary, and I get that it was just there to like show us what was needed, but there's so many assumptions that get built into those models and now we're working against that tide already from the first workshop. We're working against the tide that assumes CCS is necessary. We're working against the tide that assumes some of these things are going to be happening and misses all of the other ideas and work that communities could be bringing in. And that, in its essence, is what being relegated as an input stakeholder group feels like. It's like, well, now I'm sitting here just kind of continuing to throw my arguments at this wall, when from the beginning, the conversation should have been, what does 2045 look like to you all, EJ? And we're going to build a model based on that. When does that conversation start? And there's real progress being made on that, and we're having to figure it out. Okay, we don't really know how that would work. Let's ask some of these questions. Let's figure this out. That's co-creation in a really specific example. And that's what the scoping plan is, right? It's essentially a model. We're creating a scenario that then will hopefully inform all this rulemaking and regulations that will happen after, legislation that'll hopefully be needed, all of that work that we can do. This is our moment to create a shared vision, and we're entering into it with so many assumptions already decided. And I really think CARB as an agency falls prey to what a lot of scientific academic-based agencies fall prey to, which is like, oh, but we know these things. No, you don't. You really don't. I remember somebody making an assumption once to me, saying, for instance, water savings in ag, they said like, oh, there's not a lot of water savings to be done there. I forget what the context was. It was at one of the EJAC meetings, because most people are using drip irrigation. And I was like, you've been to Kern County? Because they're not using drip irrigation. They're still using overhead spraying sprinklers. And and I just got struck by this moment of just like, wow, have you ever spent time in Kern County? And it's kind of like what Martha said, it's like, wait, do you know really what's happening on the ground? Because these community members do. And I think there's just so much that we're missing and assuming that just fundamentally is wrong. And it creates a really disingenuous process that's incredibly frustrating, is a big reason why I think some folks like me didn't apply to be on the EJAC this year. And Luis alluded to this, right? And I'm so proud of so many of my colleagues on this call who decided to do it again, because it's just been this exercise in futility, right? Like, we're gonna try again, when some of us are like, I don't know if I got the energy for that anymore. You know, it's a lot to have to keep bringing in these stories. It's a lot to keep making the same arguments over and over and over again. Something could be better than cap and trade. We talked about that in a decade. We're not allowed to talk about that. And that's such a foundational assumption. Is it even working the way we thought it would? It's not, but we can't even ask those questions from the get. This is the first round of workshops, and so many assumptions have already been made.
Okay, so I'm gonna chime in, because I think this is the kind of conversation we need to be having, and I think it's dope that we're doing it right now. So a couple of points. I think one I wanna acknowledge a couple of things, and I think I just want to acknowledge it and apologize on my own end, right? Because I'm coming into this process, and it's really interesting how you get inside government, and you're like trying to figure out so much. So, and this is what I said at the EJAC meeting as well too. I remember there was a way where I was like, oh my God, there's like so much. There's so much that we need from the EJAC. How do we do it? How do we talk about right? There's the modeling, there's like the 2017 recommendations, which I have a question on. There's, like the what's happened since that scoping plan has gotten passed. There's the status, there's the et cetera. And I remember like telling Trish this, and I'm just gonna be super transparent because unfortunately I'm not the other way to be. I remember telling this to Trish that I was like, let's just have this June meeting and we'll kind of focus, we'll get into all the substantive things in July, right? And I remember making this call, and I remember talking about this with Gender, with Richard, and when we got to that June meeting, and I think, basically, I think Martha said this. Maybe you didn't say it. So if you didn't say it, Martha, you can just say I didn't say it. But it was like, and maybe it wasn't the June meeting. Anyways, it doesn't matter where it was, but it was like this first round of integrating EJ into the scoping plan fail. Like it's a fail. And I remember being like, okay, like that is good to hear, because there's a question there for me of like how transparent, how honest can we be with ourselves? So right, so I'm like okay, like this was not integration, and then what does that integration look like going forward? And then how are we being honest about where we're at and like what we're doing? And so I know, for example, we've done a lot of coordination and communication with ISD internally in CARB. I know that we've had, Carrie Byland from ISD be a part of like every EJAC meeting thus far. And part of that was kind of like to think about like, well, how are we having ISD in the room? How are we having them at the table? But I also know that we've kind of heard repeatedly like, well, we want to have ISD here. We want to have them in the room. And so I think what is helpful to hear, and I appreciate that from Martha, particularly that piece of like, we want those deep dives, we want those conversations. I think, Katie, your point, we want to start pulling apart and unpacking the models. And I think to that question around the assumptions and what's been built in and what modeling has actually been done, I think the best person I think that can answer it, and I can kind of set the record straight, it's probably not me, as much as I like to think that it would be, but it would be Rajinder. And I mean, I think, at least from what I've been told, and I think from what I know, and I believe this to be true, I don't think any modeling has been done for the scoping plan. I think that there were other reports that were required to do, but that's my understanding. But Rajinder, if you don't mind chiming in and kind of like, I think setting the stage for all of us, like that would be helpful. And I think, like I said, ISD is listening, other divisions are listening. It's helpful for us to honestly hear, like, we want deep dives, we want them happening now. We want not just like, it sounds like not just Carrie in the room, but we want that technical piece. Like, and I think part of what we're trying to move to is like, how do we get to that collaborative space with the EJAC where the EJAC is setting the agenda, right? But before we get to those things, I just wanted to say like, yeah, like Rajinder, do you mind just chiming in and saying basically like, where is the modeling at on the scoping plan? So that we're all kind of on the same page. I think we have to unmute her though. Wow, the anticipation is building right now.
I don't see Rajinder.
Okay. I'm pretty sure she's here. And if not, then that would be terrible that I just basically like set her up to fail there. She's saying she's on. She just chatted me. She's an attendee. You just have to unmute her. Okay.
There is an RS, so I'm just going to unmute that person and hope that it's Rajinder Sahota.
Thank you. Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Chanel. I was talking, and then all of a sudden I realized nobody was responding when I said, "Can you hear me?" But no, and I want to just step in and just make sure that I reinforce some of the things that Chanel believes to be true and that Chanel has been collaborating on with us. And that is the status of the modeling and the status of where we're at. So the materials that we shared yesterday, the SB 100 report, the AB 74 report, the carbon neutrality work by E3, that was done over the course of the past few years in response to board direction and in response to legislative mandates. So we were told to do those things. And we had spent probably 2.5 to 3 years on any one of those reports in parallel. So that work went on. As we're thinking about the scoping plan and as we were doing those reports, we always had in mind that we can't just do reports and set them aside. And so one of the things that ARB was pushing for, especially in the SB 100 report, was we need to have some more discussion around public health and air quality and resiliency and natural working lands. And so those pieces were elevated in that discussion because we knew that the electricity sector was going to be a critical part of a clean energy future. So as we work through those things and taking on a role as a public health agency, we tried to embed that in some of those reports as they were being done, because that way, at the end of the day, those reports would reflect not just the priorities of reducing emissions, but actually improving public health and getting us on that long-term path to deep decarbonization. So we get to 2021 and we're kicking off the scoping plan, and those reports are salient. They're important because the governor has referenced them in his discussions. The administration was involved in those. Other state agencies were involved in those. And as we work through the scoping plan this year, we're going to be looking at those reports for what they say and some of the lessons that they had in there, just because they are a resource. If you wanted to, you could actually compare the reports against each other and you would realize they don't even match each other because they have different authors, different expertise, different sectors. And so what we get to do in the scoping plan is build scenarios and build a path to hit the 2030 target that shows that we're on the way to hit the 2030 target, to hit carbon neutrality, that pulls from them, and they're a toolkit. And so it's really about taking pieces from the reports to build the paths that we need now that we can do the modeling on those. So in no way are they setting a precedent, nor are they the scoping plan modeling. We have yet to do the scoping plan modeling. We still need to build what the scoping plan scenarios should look like. So that work has not commenced. We're still in the beginning stages. So I want to allay that fear that those reports are the scoping plan. They are not the scoping plan.
Thank you, Rajinder. And I think I had Rajinder chime in because I know that I've heard this and I wanted to make sure, like, I wanted to double check and then I was like, let me triple check and then let me just have it be publicly said, right? That's not to discount anything that has been said. I think it's just a kind of, for me, I guess in some ways, to set the stage that this conversation that we're having about integration and what it looks like and what the scoping plan could be, I think I mean, you know what, I'm an optimist and this is my first time, so I don't have the experience yet that everybody else does, but part of me does think, like, can it be an opportunity for us to do, I think, what was talked about in terms of like looking at the assumptions in the report, pulling them apart, thinking of that I think what you were talking about, Catherine, about the cost and how we're assessing worth. And then I think to what you talked about, Katie, right, that visioning from the very start and like how do we build on communities. But I think this goes into my follow-up question, and P.S. thank you, Rajinder, for chiming in. Like I appreciate that. It's twofold follow-up question, I think. And I know we have other panelists, so I'm going to ask this question. I know we have other questions. I'm going to ask this question, and we can kick it back to the audience. But this came up earlier, and so I was intrigued by it. There was a point where it said to, and I think this was Mayor Ray Leon. He said, "Rise the EJAC where it should be." And so there was a twofold question for me, which is one, what is the role of the EJAC as you see it? So that's question one, because one of the things I feel like we've been wrestling with, right, is like advisory. What does that mean? What does that look like? So what is the role of the EJAC as you see it? And then two, and I think this does build on what we've already been talking about, there is that model where it's like, we're boxing you in, you have to come, you have to talk about like how horrible things are, how much you're in pain, right? That parading of the suffering, which is a huge amount of emotional labor. What does the opposite of that look like? And I hear like creating that fertile ground, I hear listening to the EJAC, but I am curious, right? Like if this workshop and this idea of like, right, being siloed in this box is like the antithesis of what we want, right? Like the deep dives is what we do want, right? And that kind of co-creation is what we do want, what we want to get to. What does the future look like, right, for the scoping plan process? So twofold question: what do you see as the role of the EJAC? And then, given kind of like what we've shared, what would the future look like?
I feel like I keep talking first, so I'm going to make somebody else go first.
I think I'm okay with you talking first, because if I remember correctly, you have to leave at 3:30.
Oh, thank you for reminding me, Chanel. I do have to get off after this question, so I guess I'll start. So if people haven't actually read AB 32, I wish they would. And it's not a perfect bill by any measure, but I'm going to use a term. I'm going to tee up Martha with this phrase of benefits and burdens, right? And really just tee her up to be like, in my mind, the role of the EJAC was never meant to be restricted to the scoping plan process. That if you really read the bill, it was meant to be a partnership to ensure that the intent of the bill, the language in the bill around benefits and burdens was being honored and met. And that we were really looking for those intersectional, how do you create jobs, how do you create more sustainable communities goals that really can only come when community members are engaged deeply and meaningfully throughout, not just planning, but implementation. And I'll stop there because I don't want to steal Martha's thunder on a broader point.
And that, well, I mean, I think that, you know, I've been very obsessed with this concept of how policymakers actually do assess benefits and burdens, and that it cannot be done without real widespread stakeholder engagement, so we understand those, right? And in many ways teaching agencies how to do it. And that's also a co-creation process, right? I often say justice is difficult. Nobody's actually been forced to do it. Nobody at CARB on their duty statement or job description or performance evaluation is being asked, how are you achieving racial and environmental justice within your organization and without? And and so without those tools, we're stuck repeating things, right? So we actually want to sit down with you and figure out how would we assess those benefits and burdens, because we actually know a little bit about that, right? We've told you with the solar roof program, with the EV cars, with all of those, we told you, you know, that's not going to work. That's an early adopter, rich white folk, well, rich white and brown folk, you know, I will exclude brown folks who have money and are early adopters of new technologies. I know a few, but you know, that's the problem, right? There's like, no, it's not gonna do that. Oh, but we gotta really reduce these emissions, and we're obsessed with reducing greenhouse gases, so all your measures can tell you your metrics, but it's not telling you the human cost of those, right? And we're hearing them. We're not worried about ozone. We're, you know, for somebody from you know, yesterday's presentation, for someone to say that a 2,500-foot setback is a political issue is a misunderstanding of what it is like to live next to an oil drilling site, right? The constant noise, the constant emissions, the lack of regulatory oversight. And to tell us, when we have been telling you for close to 20 years that we need direct emissions reduction, and to say it's a political decision, that tells me that there is still just a real lack of understanding of what we consider benefits and what we consider burdens.
Yeah, and I think what I would add again is a bit of a reiteration, but I think important points to underscore. I mean, I think a basic goal is dialogue rather than one-way conversation where we're receiving and responding information. I appreciate the clarification that specific modeling for the scoping plan hasn't been done. And I raised yesterday that the volume of information that was shared in those 4 hours with no break at very rapid fire speed was just a lot to keep up with. So if that is foundational information, is there time in the timeline for us to actually have those speakers come before us as the EJAC and be able to ask the questions that I wanted to ask, because I had a way longer list than I was able to get to. And again, it was a unidirectional conversation. I said a bunch of stuff, but there was not necessarily a response to it. So dialogue, a comprehensive plan, right? Yes, the scoping plan is a part of it, but CARB also does a lot of things beyond the scoping plan. And obviously, I think many people have stated today, we're also super behind on meeting clean air standards. And that is a central role of CARB that also requires integrating EJ and equity. And people have also mentioned the issue with EJAC permanence. It's one of the things that CVAC as a coalition came together and asked for before this group even launched. When the group it disbands and then reforms, some institutional knowledge is lost. And Chanel, like I'm also completely new to this process, so I do come into it relatively optimistic. And I also want to be really honest that I feel super rushed. I was just added like 2 or 3 weeks ago. EJAC is not even fully formed. And it's felt like a bit of inundation. Like even being able to be prepared for today's panel, our prep call was yesterday. Like we could have had a really awesome lineup of speakers or like given our own presentations, but we didn't have enough time to do that. And like compared to all of these other, like that must have taken months. I would assume these other workshops that I've been seeing have been like super well put together with speakers that were obviously very well prepared. So I do already feel a bit at a disparity that I'm not starting from the same place that everybody else is.
Just say the main characteristic of white supremacy culture is sense of urgency, right? And I think I get that 2022 is coming up quickly in the global scheme of things and that there's a sense of urgency to get this scoping plan done, but this is too important to rush. This is the perfect moment to slow down and to have the deep conversations and to question the models and to really do the work of engagement, which is hard in COVID and hard with everything else that people are dealing with, but possible. And if it takes us advocating with the legislature for an extension, right? If it takes whatever it takes to get it done well, that has to be the goal here. I think we all want the goal to be healthier communities, reducing emissions, doing these things. I do believe my interaction with CARB staff that there are a lot of folks at CARB who really want to do that. I really do believe that. But if we're not giving ourselves the space to have those conversations, then we're setting ourselves up to just keep repeating what we've been doing. And what we've been doing is simply just not good enough, which is nothing personal to CARB. It's just a matter of now is the moment for us all to pivot together.
Yeah, you know, my experience with CARB staff is you all care about the air, right? That's your mission. And, you know, in some ways you can't accomplish that without us as a movement, right? We can help you get the things that you fight for that you can't win, but not if you continue to treat us as a bother or, you know, do I have to, and that comes across often, right? You know, I don't want to play respectability politics and show up in a suit and straighten my hair and talk a certain way so that you get just how smart I actually am and not just funny, right? So
Same page. We're on the same page. I was just saying in terms of straightened hair and the fact that I think I just said like that was dope. So we're simpatico, right? Like,
yeah. Just so the folks who don't know understand, part of white supremacy culture is that you show up a certain way to look professional, and that's if you're, you know, woman of color with curly hair, it means you straighten it out. And I just want to put that out there because we need to start understanding how our communities internalize these spaces. And I am part of that community, even though I've been, you know, working in this world for a long time.
yes, Yes, definitely. And I think I think that grounding and like white supremacy culture is real, particularly that sense of urgency, how we show up, being able to be authentic. And I think the goal for me has been for a while now is like how does Chanel get to become and show up to be the most authentic that she can be? And I think we would want that for everyone, and that does not mean that that's a sign of like anyone's intelligence. I'm going to say a few more things, and then I know we have comments and we have questions, and Trisha's nodding because she's like, Chanel, I told you this, and Katie's going to leave soon. I think I don't know if we've ever shared this, but I think part of I think what has been driving the urgency is that we waited to get started on the EJAC until I started in February 1st. And so because I think I wanted to have a conversation with Richard and Rajinder, and we wanted to figure out where it should be and where it should kind of like live and like what that interaction, that collaboration looks like. And now I do feel like things have been moving fairly quickly. I know, like I said, I mean, you guys all heard. So it's you know, Rajinder's on, we have the chair on, we have board members on, Richard's on. So a lot of us are listening and are hearing, and I think that need of like slowing down. I mean, I've taken notes in terms of some of those pieces, right, around like the slowing down piece to do some of that deep work, that piece around the researchers and like coming in and actually having a dialogue. I think those are all things that I think I hear, and more importantly, want to co-create and collaborate with the EJAC on in terms of thinking about like, what does that agenda setting look like? What does the pacing look like? And I think obviously as a part of that, it's not just me, it's not just Trish, like CARB is an agency, right? So we have the divisions, which does include ISD, that are a part of that conversation as well. And so I think, yes, like I think we, myself included and Trish included, have all felt that crunch. And I know, you know, ISD and other divisions have felt that too. And so I think there really is a case of like, okay, we realize that like we do have that 2022, I think as you noted, Katie, right, that deadline. There are ways around that, right? I think that's a good point to kind of figure out. But more importantly, if we really want to do this well, obviously it means we can't continue to like rush and to push ourselves. And so I think we all hear that collectively.
Well, and Chanel, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you for my last word to be. Do not take blame for the feeling of rush. It was right for you to ask the process to delay until you came in. You were supposed to be one of our agency liaisons. Like you should have done that. That is not what we're talking about. It would have been rushed if it started in November. You know, because frankly, this is a really big undertaking, saying how we're going to get to zero in the midst of knowing we're not on track to get to 2030 already. Like this is a lot of work. This is a moment that needs to pivot, and it was never going to be enough time. And so I can't sit here and let you take ownership for the feeling of urgency, because that would have been present if they had started before you joined or not. And with that, I will leave you, my beautiful friends, and be here to continue to support. And thank you for doing this work.
I concur with Katie. This division is fairly new, you know, Chanel. CARB has had a commitment to environmental justice, and I know the executive has done a phenomenal job in you know, bringing environmental justice and institutionalizing it, and the board has been obviously a leader in bringing environmental justice, and the legislature. There's been a lot of work. As I said earlier, I really commend this board in comparison to others. It's by far the most progressive I've seen. However, we do have a division that should have gotten that memo. I'm really glad to see that Rajinder is on the call. I like to get to a point where I'm able to just pick up the phone or you know, and send an email and says, you know, be able to communicate with her, you know, being able to, you know, I don't know, send a message, being able to have, I don't know, bi-weekly meetings, and making sure that we're making that connection directly with ISD as well. I don't think that this needs to fall on the environmental justice program, because the environmental justice program has, like I said earlier, every division, every program, all of it. You have the entire agency that you have to support in institutionalizing in driving the change, so that the next time that perhaps you move on to better and bigger things, Chanel, that if in your absence and at some point, if that were to happen, that they had to go through a process of replacing you, that it wouldn't be like, oh, we got to wait for another Chanel to come in before we start the EJ process. So that's indicative of the issues that we have been facing, and a great opportunity for ISD and CARB altogether not to be caught off guard and wait for someone like you, Chanel, to come in a deputy position to drive environmental justice. That needs to be the core mission moving forward. But again, I say that very cautiously because I'm really thankful to the board, thankful to the executive, because I know that they are constantly beating to the drum of environmental justice. And I have found, and again, all honesty speaking, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I have seen that the hardest change, cultural change within the agency, is everything, from, lower down the chain. There's a lot of great people, but there's a lot of resistant people too. And we find that everywhere. It doesn't matter if you have 5 staff or 5,000 staff. It's just a reality we face, that not everybody's going to be with the program. And so that's what we really need to focus on, right? And get those that aren't with the program, getting with the program. Simple. It's a management thing. All right, thank you.
Okay, so I think just to be a somewhat decent facilitator at this point, I promised to the audience, I said that we were going to kick it over. Trish, God bless you for holding it down. I know that there's chats and I know that there's hand raised. I will turn it over to you and trust your judgment on where we go.
Thank you very much. Given the time and the number of hands raised, I wanted to let folks know that for those of you that are putting the question in the chat, I'm recording those to be able to follow up to the EJAC. Unless they know you specifically, it might be a challenge to actually provide your response, but still, I'm trying to do what I can with the time. So I appreciate those of you, and I do encourage folks with their hands up to go ahead and do that, because I don't think that we'll get through all of them. But I did want to call on Chuck Mills next, who's had his hand raised for a very, very long time. So let me unmute you now. And everyone is self-muted once there you go.
Hey, thank you so much. And thank you, Chanel, and everyone on the panel for this really engaging conversation. This is the 4th CARB workshop that I've attended in 2 days. It is by far the best. And I know, Catherine, you were concerned about it not being as expertly put together. But one of the things that I'm still just quite honestly a bit stunned about is that the authenticity in this conversation and the genuineness and the fact that this is a CARB sanctioned conversation where a panel has had the flexibility and latitudes to talk about how the EJAC has been marginalized in the past, how CSS is greenwashing, how cap and trade is imperfect, how tropical forest standards exacerbated matters. It's just been really refreshing, and just as an example in comparison to the workshop from this morning, which was on nature-based solutions as we move forward with the scoping plan. Early on there were a series of icons put up on the screen that talked about how nature-based solutions connect to a variety of additional benefits. Nowhere on that screen was social or environmental justice. And then for the next 2 hours, and Mayor Leon can attest to this, never was social justice or environmental justice raised until Luis and Mayor Leon raised it, and that's a flag. And when we are talking about nature-based solutions that tie directly back to social equity issues and redlining, whether it be urban green infrastructure or some of the nature-based solutions that Mayor Leon raised, it does give me pause. So I really just want to appreciate and acknowledge this conversation today. I've seen a lot of familiar faces on this call, obviously Chanel and Mayor Leon and Mary Rose and Katie, and You know, a lot of you know that I've worked to move my organization. By the way, my organization is California Relief. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Grants Administration there. Probably should have said that up front. I appreciate the opportunity to comment here. I'm not a member of the environmental justice community. My organization is trying to do more in that space. And so my question to you is, for groups like myself that don't occupy the EJ space but want to do more in support of that effort, what can we do as advocates to uplift EJAC as you move forward? Because I have seen over the years, and it's always been disheartening to see EJAC comments captured in CARB publications but not implemented. And I know by statute they have to be captured, but it's rarely that I see them implemented. So what can we do as advocates to help ensure that EJAC is brought in at the beginning and that those comments are not just captured for posterity, but actually implemented?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in here just because I don't have a hand raised or a camera. But yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate, you know, acknowledging the environmental justice and you know, even though I don't know you, I can definitely sense the genuineness in what you're trying to accomplish. I'll just give you the very simple. I think this requires a much more larger conversation. I certainly welcome that. But the simple is, I would say, look beyond Sacramento. I think Sacramento has a history of going to their statewide contractors, universities, and, you know, just sort of the traditional type of consultants to implement programs statewide. It does take a little bit more work to go out to the communities and build relationships and identify the groups and organizations that are working and that have been there for many times for decades, being the safety net for the community and working with disadvantaged communities. You're not always going to find them necessarily carrying the flag of environmental justice or disadvantaged communities. Sometimes it's community development. I mean, it's a very, you know, very different ways that different groups may identify, but it certainly are doing the work of bringing services and opportunities and infrastructure and climate change type of projects into the community. It wasn't until 2000, we've been around for like 35 years, and it wasn't until 2000 that we started engaging in environmental justice, and we realized that those other 15 years earlier, we were doing environmental justice. So I would say that, you know, certainly give groups an opportunity in the community, and Sacramento isn't the only place to find contractors. In fact, many times they're very far removed themselves and end up reaching out to grassroots community-based organizations to eventually carry out the work, but further down the road. So I would say that if we give them opportunities to work directly, cutting out the middle, the middle contractors, a lot of times, you know, you will yield much greater results and benefits and capacity building opportunities and sustainability of programs. Because at the end of the day, oh, I think did I lose everyone? I'll pause there because I think I lost. Yeah. Okay. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks so much, Luis. That is helpful. And thanks, Chanel, for asking the questions that allowed for such authentic engagement.
You know, Chuck, this is Ray. So I think, you know, you could also speak up and say, hey, where's the environmental justice voice here early on, you know? And kind of just pose a question to challenge the imagination of those in there. If there is no environmental justice voice, then something should be done about it. If there is, maybe it'll spark it up early on. And but share some of your experiences and your work with us out here, you know?
Will do, Ray. Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
So Trish, let me just say, you know, and I think some of the colleagues have shared something relative to what Chuck just pointed out in terms of EJ not just being in one box apart from the other, the other boxes, always having, I think that's a reminder of the need to always have programmed early on environmental justice voices within these concepts or ideas that may be presumed to not have relevance within the environmental justice space. Yet they do, And so just I think that's a highlight on that one.
Okay. So Alice has also had a hand raised for a long time and has provided a lot of written comments, but is still here. So if you'd like to speak, go ahead. But I know you've indicated earlier that you have to leave soon. So I have, let's see, I have unmuted you. You are self-muted though. If you wanted to say anything, I'll give it just a moment before we go on to the next person. Alice is still self-muted. Make sure that it's not me. Okay. Then I am going to go on to Colin Murphy. And I unmuted you, Colin, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Alice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. So sorry. Technology. Now I can't figure out how to unraise my hand. Thank you so much to all the panelists and all the speakers. This has been so inspiring. And just a bit of background. So I'm a recovering architect by background, and I specialize in the schools and pre-K through higher ed sector. And I just would like to make a couple of points. I think that what Catherine White said early on just struck me so much when she said, she talked about the cost effectiveness and the valuation of lives, right? And, the fact that the farm workers were being judged on the salary, right? And that was their total sum valuation versus a tech worker in Silicon Valley, for example. What about the children? How do you value their lives? They have no income. How do you value the home, a housebound, healthcare worker who's actually working out of home, taking care of her family members, right? Either seniors or children on that end. That was just shocking to me. So thank you for sharing that statistic and the modeling methods. There's something wrong with our system where we actually do not actually value what is truly valuable in this world and externalize all those other costs, right? At the risk of, harming profits to corporations. So thank you for raising that. And it does actually raise a red flag in my mind to actually look further into what those models and what those systems problems that we have and that are continued within scoping plans and the way we frame scoping plans, even the way we frame, as many speakers have said today, the way we frame environmental justice. Here we are, an EJAC community, and here we are speaking go talk amongst yourselves so that, yes, we can check off the box and, then we can continue with business as usual and we can say we've, addressed environmental justice because we fulfilled a committee. And I play a similar role, and I'm getting deja vu listening to this meeting and to the experiences that people have relayed. I serve on a federal committee for environmental justice and equity under the Green Building Advisory Committee. Granted, that's only 3 or 4 meetings and just beginning as well. In that instance, I'm repping the NAACP Centering Equity for Sustainable Building Sector, but I see so many similarities of the way we're being treated, marginalized, tokenized. And in fact, I think a critical thing to realize when we ask again to be integrated into every committee, every project process, but every decision-making body, that is, I think, a core piece we ought to press for, which is being part of the decision-making body. And so much, especially in the design sector, in the building sector, design and construction, you know, the design process of community involvement, you know, has been a farce as far as real community stakeholder involvement. We need all of our processes to be community-led and at least at minimum informed by grassroots level, right? Community members, and they ought to be not extractive experiences where that knowledge, right? Oh, that revelation that that soccer field is next to those Wilmington oil wells is not a sudden revelation that they take away and they run away with that data and then they do something to address it. that actually the community members who know that best in the CBOs and in the EJ communities can actually have positions, maybe within CARB, within Energy Commission, within our leadership, within our government, where that they are paid, right? They're compensated to lead and be part of that decision-making process. I just throw that out there, just, you know, for a suggestion. But I feel as though we continue to be marginalized. I'm willing to give it, you know, a few more months of, you know, figuring out what this is, but I just feel as I can see that that's happening again, right? In so many equity meetings that I'm involved in, and these new task force are started up, right? And they gather us, and then they, you know, they put us in a little room, and they make us, you know, present in front of a panel, and then they nod, and then they go off and they make their decisions, right? We're never part of the decision-making bodies. So I just wanted to put that out there. I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope we can continue this engagement. Thank you.
All right, should I go now? Sure, great. So this is Colin Murphy. I'm with the UC Davis Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy. Definitely want to echo what was said about this has been a great. Oh, sorry, I was hearing an echo of myself. It's been a great webinar. Certainly gotten into a lot more substance than and there's been a better, more authentic conversation here than in some of the previous early webinars on the scoping plan. I wanted to talk a little bit about the modeling and the work that's already been done. And I think it was Catherine White who said earlier in this conversation that you know, so much of the process of the scoping plan and climate policy is modeling and data dependent, and yet the models are kind of, you know, being presented. And I think she'd love to see, you know, models on the energy transition run without having things like market-based mechanisms playing so central a role. And I agree. I think those are a lot of critical modeling questions. The problem that we run into, and you know, we being myself and a lot of others in the academic community who ended up working on these models, is doing a model of a system as complex as the California economy or even just the California transportation sector is incredibly complex, and it's a multi-year process. And you know, for things like the driving California's transportation emissions to zero report, I led the fuel section on that. You know, we published that about a month ago. We had about 9 months to work on that, which is, you know, sort of a blink of an eye in academic and modeling time frame. So I think this doesn't necessarily help us right now for the purpose of this scoping plan, because things are starting to get rolling and decisions have to be made. But I think that it really reinforces the need to keep investing in a lot of these basic sort of energy system and energy transition models to make sure that we build environmental justice and equity into the model at a very fundamental level, rather than having EJ sort of be a chapter that gets added on, you know, in an appendix at the end. We tried to do that in the driving to transportation emissions to zero report. We had EJ considerations in there. One of the problems we also ran into was, you know, we had the bandwidth, and we had academics who were working on this on a regular basis, and it was difficult to find partners sometimes who had the same level of capacity and availability to work on these things. And I think, again, that sort of reinforces the need for the state and the philanthropic sector to keep really continuing to invest in this. And if I could make one sort of quick plea for assistance, we're working on a project right now looking at the future of fuels policy and how we're going to sort of fill in the gaps in the transportation portfolio that zero emission vehicles can't necessarily solve over the next 20 years until the transition to the fully ZEV fleet goes by. We would like to have a much stronger contribution and assessment of environmental justice and equity as we do this, and we're having trouble locating partners who are interested in working with us. So certainly feel free to reach out to me. I know that a number of the people who are on this call I've worked with before can connect you. I also know that anybody at CARB knows how to reach me. So if anybody wants to sort of talk about equity in fuels policy and help set some goals and parameters on how we analyze that, we would absolutely love to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colin. Really appreciate that offer. I was just going to quickly respond and say, definitely I can follow up with you offline. Definitely hear what you're saying in terms of capacity and availability, and also would be interested in talking again in a similar vein of what we've been discussing this afternoon of how to make those conversations unidirectional, or sorry, dialogue and not unidirectional. As much as I think the modeling and the data is important, so is the community perspective and the impacts that are being felt at the community level. And so part of why it's also difficult to engage in those conversations is because sometimes models feel very sterile and detached from people's everyday reality, and they also have a lot of limitations that aren't always openly acknowledged. So definitely happy to talk more offline about how we could continue the dialogue about improving models and also making sure that modelers are grounded in what's happening at the community level.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, we'll go to Bill McGavern. I'll unmute you.
Hey, thanks. Bill McGavern with Coalition for Clean Air. Good to hear from so many longtime colleagues. I wanted to first just caution against the use of too many obscure acronyms and jargon. I was trying to picture what someone who's not an insider would be thinking of, what is this mysterious ISD I keep hearing about? So, I think the more that we can get away from the obscure acronyms, the more accessible we make the conversation to people. But I also had a substantive question. I think in this scoping plan, there's a tension between a focus on 2045 carbon neutrality and on 2030, 40% emission reduction as required by SB 32. So I wondered if the panelists could comment on what it means for environmental justice if we focus more or less on a 40% emission reduction in SB 32 compared to a carbon neutrality target in 2045. Thanks.
Man, that is not a short answer. I'd actually like to hear more questions, and I'm sorry, Bill, to not answer that directly, because I'm thinking about how to answer it right now. Unless somebody else already has a ready answer.
I do, this is Luis. I do want to acknowledge a very good point about the acronyms. And I think it's a great opportunity to introduce to those who may not be familiar with Industrial Strategies Division. Maybe that's an indicator that it needs to be a more well-known division. Maybe we need to continue to drive the message of what their function is, what they do, what the structure is, so that the public better understands next time they hear ISD. It's kind of like when we say CARB. I think we know what CARB does, but we don't know what ISD does. But anyways, it's Industrial Strategies Divisions, if I am correct.
You are correct. ISD is Industrial Strategies Division, and I think I'm open to having EJAC members talk about that question around the tension. I'm happy to share some thoughts on that too if it's helpful, but I think this is a for the EJAC. But the other thing I would say too is I think to Luis's point, I think it's probably helpful in some ways just to kind of like open up like CARB a little bit, because as somebody that worked like on CARB advocacy for a while, I definitely did not understand and or know all the roles that all the divisions played. And so that I think could be helpful just in terms of understanding, particularly with the scoping plan, right? That it's like it's all these divisions coming together, including ISD. So I think that kind of ties into that deep dive piece. But I think to that question that I think Bill brought up, I think do folks have like initial reactions? I hear you, Mark, though, that that's a big question. Ray or Catherine?
I just want to ask, you mean there's not a EJSD? That what I'm being told right now?
An EJSD? I needed that laugh because I think I'm getting to the end and I'm starting to feel it. I'm starting to feel the end of it. There's the Office of Environmental Justice, but we don't have an SD to it. No, we don't have an E. There's no ESD, EJSD.
I'm just thinking, you know, with the questions that Catherine posed earlier regarding the research and the models, I think that's already in an arena that's more technical, and I think there's something to that, and I think we could grow something out of there that kind of takes it deeper. You know what I mean? And starts developing the skeleton from within. You know, while we're trying to, you know, deal with this stuff on the outside, the epidermis, but I think we got to take it deeper, you know, and with that type of thought.
I also
Yeah,
love
and I
this.
think I would. Oh,
Go
sorry.
for
Go
it,
ahead, Chanel.
No, I was saying I appreciated the skin. I told you I'm getting loopy. You should just go for it.
No, it's totally fine. I'm also gonna try to have a very brief answer, but I think it does go back to some of the things we were saying earlier, that there really is a twin challenge for CARB now to take the mandate to meet clean air standards and address greenhouse gases at the same time. Also recognizing, you know, connecting to some of the comments I said around experimental technologies like carbon capture and sequestration. For me, carbon neutrality is a very slippery term, right? Actually reducing air pollution, I can understand, and I think of that as being a tangible thing, although there are definitely market-based schemes that make that much more complicated. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that has to be unpacked around what carbon neutrality even means, how it's defined, how we think we can get there, because I think there's a lot of outstanding debate about what that actually means.
Even when we're talking about the market-based, I mean, we know that there's an impact when people get sick and can't go to work, you know, and there's a cost there. You know, that study that what was her name?
Jane Hall.
Jane Hall. Yeah. That she put down a number of years back, quantifying the impacts of air quality in regards to the results on the health of students and parents in with the schools and in the workforce. You know, and the cost of what air quality represented to the region. You know, which was in the, I don't know, I can't remember the millions or hundreds of millions, but that was a lot. So, you know, that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
6
What number?
billion.
It's billion. So, yeah, so I don't understand. This was like about 10 years ago minimum. You know, I think we should try to figure out how we continue, you know, having our understanding of what those numbers are, you know, particularly with the fires that took place, and what does that mean in terms of the impact on health? How do we, yeah, I don't know, it's, I know it's a lot, but also, at least for me as an individual and us as a little CPO, but as an agency, I think it's something that could be handled.
And I also just want to quickly uplift the comments that Alice made earlier about that there also is inherently something problematic about putting prices on things. How do you value the ability to let my kid go outside and play? Like, what dollar amount do you attach to that, right? So like even being able to discuss some of those underlying assumptions, it's important to be able to quantify and understand, like as human beings, we want to be able to measure things. And at the same time, we also have to name the limitations.
And I feel like this is going to be extremely unsatisfying, but I'm just looking at the time, and I see that we are at 3:56, which, by the way, high five to all of us because we made it. I was like, wow, 1:30 to 4. But this has been really, really good conversation. I think we might have time for one more comment, and then we probably should wrap up.
Yeah, one or two more depending on the commenters. So first I want to give it to Amy Kyle. If you want to say anything, I know you have provided your comments in writing also. I have unmuted you. If you want to unmute yourself and speak, you can now. And I'm not hearing you.
Here I am. Sorry, I didn't know how to unmute myself like everyone else. I'm sorry. I didn't think you were going to call on me. I did type my comments in, and I get. Since you gave me the floor, though, I will just say briefly that there are a lot of things, other things to do also besides review what's already been done. And I think that there's a great potential to bring some real new thinking and methods into some of these discussions. So I would just like to add that to the list, and I thank you all for this conversation.
Thank you, Amy, so much.
Get another question in.
What was that?
Let's get another question in.
Okay, it's 3:58. So people have, because I wanted to give you guys time for closing thoughts. So are we okay? I guess we would be going a little bit longer.
The next one is Roger Lynn. I did unmute you, so you have to unmute yourself. We'll definitely give it a minute since other folks are having problems so that you can speak directly to the committee members that are on if you'd like to, Roger.
Oh, thank you, Trish. I think my comments were already captured by Bill and then Catherine's response about needing to focus on 2030 and the issues, the environmental justice issues with focusing solely on 2045 neutrality targets. Thanks. And thanks to the panel as well today, all the panelists, and Chanel and Trish for this. Thank you.
Okay, closing thoughts. Let's just do a round of folks. And thank you guys for holding it down, like I said, to 4 o'clock.
All right, what do we do?
This is Luis Olmedo again here. Just closing thought. I hope this serves as an opportunity to set the table correctly. I'm optimistic that it will. I'm glad that we had the executive and board members, the chair, in the call. I'm not sure they're still there. I can't really see everybody, but I'm very optimistic that it will. And then we can all just start, again, rolling our sleeves and getting to work. I'm waiting for the table, right? I mean, that way we can start having more, just basically start the work. I want to show up. I'm committed to the work, but I need the table. And I'm thinking that today is it's just a repeated ask. And I hope that today is the day that we get heard. And Chanel, we're here to support you. As I said earlier, the vision that I had for and when I knew about this role of a deputy in environmental justice is having somebody that would be working across all departments and agencies, and not necessarily having limited access, but having full access. And I'm still hoping that that's the direction it goes. Thank you, Chanel, and thank you to your team. Trish, obviously, always does a wonderful job. Appreciate all of you.
This is Catherine. I'll go next. Ditto to all of the thanks. Really appreciate the time and effort that went into putting this panel together, and that we did have the opportunity to prep, even if it felt a bit rushed. I know you all were working really hard behind the scenes to make this intentional and a really constructive use of our time. I've definitely really enjoyed the conversations today. Really appreciate everybody who stayed on and participated. Again, we've seen, I think, hints of progress. It's been a bit of a bumpy start. There's a lot more work ahead, and silos and incrementalism certainly are not going to get us there. I think we've discussed that a lot today. So really looking forward to working on improvements and really the deep integration that we know we need to create transformation on the ground for environmental justice communities.
And yes to all of that. And, and I invite other CARB staff and the board who's on this call to really figure out how to put this into practice, how to set the table, because we cannot move forward until we're all at the table equally with the same power to define the work that we're going to be doing. And so we invite you to be partners with us in figuring out how to do this and doing it right this time.
I think Mayor Ray Leon, you have the last word.
Hello, all. This was good. I think this is just different. We were in person the last time, and it's you can't see nobody, else but those on the screen. Usually we'll be at the table, look around, see different people, say hi to people. You know who's who in the room. During the break, meet people, chat with them. This is different. It's different. But let's make the most with what we've got. I don't know when we'll be able to do this in person. I'm down to go to Sacramento and sit down. I kind of miss Sacramento, honestly. I've been cooped out here, but yeah. So I think it's a good beginning. I think there's some good, strong bullet points that I'm sure you guys have noted today in terms of what could be different this round, and we could possibly empower some new systems that could take this to the next level. But I think I'm gonna echo Marta said, listen to us, listen and do, because it's yeah, that's the way it's really gonna work. I mean, I think about just my region, and it's different from Marta's region, Catherine's in my region, but also like the Sacramento North, it's a different region, Bay Area, all these regions, and we all have our different challenges. At some point it'll be good to kind of, just plot them all out. What does that mean in terms of the overarching mission that we have? And what does it mean specifically in terms of how we're able to take care of that mission while we, also bring about some economic justice, of course, environmental justice, climate justice, but some economic justice. So I think we could do all of that in one nice move. But thank you, Trish. You're great, always great. And Chanel, thanks again. And everybody enjoy their Wednesday hump day. It's 77 degrees in Huron. We're like the Bay Area right now. But awesome. All right, folks. Gracias.
Thank you all so much. Everybody, like I said, I think enjoy the hump day. We will talk soon. Bye, you guys.